My wife was soaking in the tub when her iPad screen illuminated. The text preview read, "Last night felt incredible." I typed a quick reply, "Use the back gate. I'm alone." The patio sensor chimed. Suddenly, my blood ran completely cold. Let me rewind. 7 years married, no kids yet, but we had a golden retriever named Barnaby and a thriving landscaping business. I built it from the ground up with my business partner, Elias. We've known each other since we were 19, pushing mowers in the July heat, smelling like two-stroke engine oil and cheap sunscreen. He co-signed my first commercial loan when the bank looked at me like I was a joke. He knew the alarm code to my warehouse. He knew my favorite bourbon. He stood next to me at the altar. That Tuesday at 8:15 p.m., Sable's iPad was synced to her phone, sitting face up on the kitchen island. I was sorting through a stack of utility bills when the notification popped. The sender was a single emoji, a black heart, and that deliberate anonymity told me this wasn't a typo. This was a well-practiced routine. Her tablet doesn't require a passcode. I tapped the banner, and the floor dropped out from under my boot. Dozens of encrypted messages, shared location pin. Make sure you delete the history. A pet name for him that made the back of my neck prickle. My chest tightened so violently I had to lean against the cold granite counter just to remember how to pull air into my lungs. My hands were shaking. I couldn't feel my fingers. Then, operating on pure, toxic adrenaline, I typed, "Use the back gate. I'm alone." I sent it. Swiped the app closed. Shoved the iPad under a stack of architectural digests. The patio motion sensor chimed exactly 7 minutes later. 7. He didn't commute from his condo in West Seattle. He was already here. He was parked in my neighborhood, waiting in the dark, watching my living room windows. I unbolted the sliding glass door and stepped into the damp October night. Elias stood by the fire pit. He was holding his overnight duffel in one hand and a six-pack of the obscure, overly hopped craft IPA Sable obsessed over in the other. 7 years of building a company together. 7 years of Friday night dinners at our place. Of course he knew her favorite beer. The color instantly drained from his face. He looked like he'd just been hit by a truck. He stammered something completely pathetic about needing to look at the Q3 tax documents at 8:30 p.m. on a Tuesday while carrying an overnight bag. Upstairs, the bathroom exhaust fan clicked off, leaving the house dead quiet. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic on I-5. I stepped aside, gesturing to the patio chairs. "Have a seat," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. "She's drying her hair." He collapsed into the wicker chair. His knees actually gave out. I walked to the outdoor bar cart, grabbed his personalized Yeti tumbler, the matte black one I'd given him for his 30th birthday, cracked open one of his beers, and poured it. The foam spilled over the rim. I set it down in front of him. I slipped my phone into my breast pocket, camera facing outward, and hit record. 2 minutes later, Sable walked out onto the deck in her silk pajamas, adjusting her smartwatch. She was humming. When she looked up and saw Elias frozen in the chair, his face buried in his hands, her arms dropped straight to her side. I watched her brain short-circuit as she tried to formulate an excuse. I just stood there and watched the two people I trusted most in this world realize they were caught in a trap they walked right into. 12 agonizing seconds of cricket. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Finally, she choked out, "What is?" And Elias blurted, "Don't say anything." At the exact same millisecond, that synchronized panic stung worse than the text messages. It showed they were a team. They had a protocol. So I delivered my line. My private investigator said I needed undeniable proof of infidelity to invalidate the business equity clause in our prenup. Thanks for the special delivery. It was a bluff, mostly. 3 weeks ago, I'd found a $400 charge for a high-end downtown steakhouse on a Tuesday when Sable claimed she was at a yoga retreat in the mountains where there was no cell service. I didn't say a word at the time. A buddy of mine, a guy who used to do insurance fraud investigations, told me something invaluable over a beer last year. Anger feels good, but evidence pays the bills. I'd hired a local investigator the next morning, spending $2,500 of my own personal savings just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. It was the smartest investment of my life. She started hyperventilating, grabbing the edge of the glass patio table, swearing it was a one-time mistake, a lapse in judgment, a drunken accident. I didn't yell. I just looked at her and asked, "When did the timeline actually start?" Elias stared at the cedar decking. Sable stared at the sliding glass door. Neither spoke, which told me everything I needed to know. Last winter, when Elias's apartment flooded from a burst pipe, he crashed in our finished basement for an entire month. Sable kept saying how nice it was to have him around, how he was like the brother she never had. She even bought him specific groceries. 30 days in my basement. The math was sickening. The bile rose in the back of my throat. I asked clearly, making sure the audio picked it up for the camera lens poking out of my pocket. Did it start under my roof? The silence was deafening. Then Elias started babbling. He didn't look at my wife. He looked at me, begging me not to dissolve the company. He talked about our commercial contract, the fleet of trucks, the pending city park bid. He didn't apologize to her. He didn't apologize to me for ruining my marriage. He apologized to his wallet. That's when the final piece locked into place. Sable had been pushing me all week to go to a supplier dinner tonight in Tacoma, a dinner I skipped at the last minute because my stomach felt off. The meetup tonight wasn't spontaneous. It was heavily premeditated. She tried to send me an hour south so she could sleep with my business partner in my own bed. I pulled out my phone and stopped the video. "Uploaded to the cloud," I said. I walked past them, grabbed the keys to the company truck from the hook by the door, whistled for Barnaby, and walked out the side gate. The dog jumped into the passenger seat, tail wagging, completely oblivious to the fact that our entire life had just burned to the ground. They can keep the house for tonight. I'm keeping the business. My phone buzzed before I even put the truck in drive. It was our accountant, Nadia. She never called after 6 p.m. unless the ears was actively kicking down her door. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," Nadia said, her voice tight, a little breathless. "You need to see the wire transfers before your lawyer does." I gripped the steering wheel. "What wire transfers?" "Elias moved half the company's operating account into a private LLC last week," she said. "I just caught it during the month-end reconciliation. I thought you authorized it for the new equipment purchase, but the LLC routing numbers don't match the dealership." "What's the LLC?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "It's registered under the name Faro Holdings. Isn't Faro your wife's maiden name?" I put the truck in park. The engine idled loudly in the quiet residential street. "How much, Nadia?" $85,000. It cleared on Thursday. 85 grand. That was our payroll cushion. That was the money meant for the winter off-season to keep our guys paid when the landscaping work dried up. They hadn't just been sleeping together. They were draining the company. "I'm going to the warehouse," I told her. "Meet me there. It's 9 o'clock at at night, Nadia protested. Meet me there, Nadia. Bring your laptop. If he took the cash, I need to know what else he signed away. I hung up, put the truck in gear, and drove away from my house. Barnaby rested his heavy head on my center console. I drove through the wet streets of Seattle, the rain starting to mist against the windshield. I wasn't just facing a divorce anymore. I was facing bankruptcy. The industrial park where we kept our trucks and equipment was dark. The chain link fence was locked, the barbed wire gleaming in the orange glow of the street lamps. I punched in my code, the gate rolled back, and I pulled the truck into the yard. Everything looked normal. Our 6 green and white branded trucks were parked in their usual spots. The pallets of fertilizer were stacked under the corrugated metal awning. But as I walked up to the main office door, my keys already out, I saw the security keypad. The small green light was flashing red. The alarm was already disarmed. I pushed the door handle. It clicked open. I reached inside, flipped the overhead fluorescents, and stepped into the main office. The filing cabinets, the ones where we kept all the physical copies of our vendor contract, vehicle titles, and employee I-9s, were wide open. The drawers were half empty. Folders were scattered across the cheap industrial carpet. Elias hadn't just come to my house tonight for a quick hookup. He had come from the warehouse. He'd been clearing out the paper trail before he went to my wife. I walked over to his desk. His monitor was gone. The hard drive was gone. Just a mess of unspooled cables sitting on the fake wood laminate. Headlights swept across the office blinds. A car pulled into the gravel lot. I watched through the slats as Nadia parked her Honda Civic next to my truck. She got out, clutching her laptop bag to her chest like a shield, looking around the dark lot, nervous. I opened the door for her. She took one look at the ransacked office, the empty filing cabinets, and stopped dead in her track. He took the physical files, I said. Nadia walked over to the cabinets, her eyes wide. She was a meticulous woman, in her late 40s, someone who lived and breathed order. This kind of chaos physically pained her. The vehicle titles, she murmured, crouching down to look at the bottom drawer. He took the titles to the truck. Why would he take the titles? The trucks are financed under the business. Nadia looked up at me, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. Not all of them. The 2 new F-350s we bought in March, you paid cash for those to avoid the interest rates. The titles were in here, free and clear. I ran a hand over my face. The sheer scale of it was starting to crush me. Can he transfer them without my signature? If he has the physical titles and he's listed as a managing partner on the operating agreement, yes, he can sign them over to an LLC, the same LLC he wired the money to. Nadia set her laptop on my desk, flipping it open and waiting for it to boot up. I need to check the lines of credit. If he's liquidating assets, he might be maxing out the credit lines too. I stood there, listening to the rain pick up, drumming against the metal roof of the warehouse. 7 years of sweat, of working weekends, missing holidays, stressing over invoices. I had built this with him, and he had used my own wife to blindside me while he dismantled it piece by piece. Okay, Nadia said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Okay, let's look at the community bank account. She clicked the mouse a few times. I watched her reflection in the dark window. Her shoulders suddenly dropped. What? I asked. The password has been changed, she said quietly. I can't get into the main portal. You're the account. Reset it. I can't. The recovery email, she pointed at the screen. It's not my firm's email anymore. It's been changed to an iCloud address. Sable's iCloud. They had locked me out of my own company's money. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had 3 missed calls from Elias and 1 text message from Sable. We need to talk. Don't do anything stupid. I pocketed the phone. Nadia, what happens on Friday when the guys expect their paycheck? The payroll software pulls directly from the operating account, she said, not looking at me. If the account is drained, the checks bounce. The direct deposits will fail. 14 guys with kids, with rent, with truck payments of their own. They relied on me. I need to freeze the accounts, I said. Right now. You have to do it in person, at the branch, when they open tomorrow morning at 9, Nadia said. But if he's already transferred the money, freezing the account just stops future transactions. It doesn't bring the 85 grand back. I looked around the torn up office. Barnaby whined from the doorway, sensing the tension in the room. I walked over and scratched him behind the ears. Print whatever ledgers you have saved locally on your hard drive, I told Nadia. Everything from the last 12 months, every discrepancy, every invoice Elias handled personally. What are you going to do? She asked, the printer whirring to life in the corner. I'm going to figure out exactly how long they've been robbing me, I said, and then I'm going to ruin them. We spent the next 4 hours in that freezing warehouse. Nadia cross-referenced the digital backups she kept on her local drive against the few physical files Elias had left behind. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. It wasn't just the 85,000. Over the last 6 months, Elias had been subtly inflating the costs on our vendor invoices for soil, mulch, and hardscaping materials. He'd overpay the supplier, and the refund for the overages wasn't going back into our corporate account. It was being routed to a third-party payment processor. Look at this, Nadia said around 2 a.m., rubbing her tired eyes. She pointed to a spreadsheet, the stone we bought for the Mercer Island retaining wall project. The invoice says we paid 40,000, but I have the original quote here in an old email thread. It was only 28,000. Where did the 12,000 go? To a consulting firm, she said, squinting at the screen. Pacific Northwest Logistics. I've never heard of them. I had. Sable had a cousin in Portland who ran a logistics consulting business that consisted of a website and a leased laptop. He was a guy who always seemed to have money, but never actually went to work. They hadn't just stolen the cash. They had been laundering my company's profits through Sable's extended family. I leaned back in my office chair. My brain was a hornet's nest of anger and exhaustion. He was planning to bleed the company dry, file for bankruptcy, and then take the trucks and the cash to start a new firm with my wife. Nadia didn't say anything. She just kept printing documents, stacking them into neat piles on my desk. At 3:30 a.m., a pair of headlights washed across the office window again. I stood up, my muscles tight. I walked over to the blinds and peeked out. It wasn't Elias's BMW. It wasn't Sable's SUV. It was a dark gray sedan. A man stepped out into the rain. He was wearing a heavy rain jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't walk toward the main office. He walked straight toward the equipment yard, heading for the heavy machinery we kept parked in the back, the skid steers and the mini excavators. He had a set of keys in his hand. Nadia, I said quietly, never taking my eyes off the man. Stay in here. Lock the door. I stepped out of the office into the freezing rain, letting the heavy steel door click shut behind me. The cold hit me instantly, soaking through my flannel shirt, but I didn't care. I kept my head down, walking across the wet gravel of the lot, putting myself between the gray sedan man and the 2 Caterpillar skid steers parked under the awning. The man didn't see me until I was 10 feet away. He was fumbling with a ring of keys, trying to find the one that fit the ignition of the primary loader. When the gravel crunched under my boot, he spun around, dropping his hand to his side. For a split second, my heart hammered against my ribs. I thought I had miscalculated. I thought Elias had actually hired muscle. But as I got closer, the security light hit his face. He was in his early 20s, wearing a high-vis vest under his unzipped jacket, looking more terrified than I was. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice carrying over the steady hiss of the rain. The kid took a step back, holding his hands up slightly. "Hey man, I'm just here for the pickup. I'm with a transport company. Got a flatbed parked a block over." I stopped. The rain was dripping off my nose. "What pickup?" He pulled a phone out of his pocket, swiping with a wet thumb. "Got a work order to move 2 Cat 259s to a storage facility in Tacoma. Client said the keys would be in the drop box by the fence, but the gate was open, so I just drove in." He turned the phone toward me. "Client is Faro Holdings. Contact name is Elias. Faro Holdings, Sable's maiden name." Elias wasn't just draining the cash. He was physically liquidating the heavy machinery while I was distracted by the bank account. These machines were worth 60 grand apiece. Without them, we couldn't do half our commercial hardscaping contract. We'd be dead in the water by noon. "Listen to me carefully," I said, keeping my voice low and completely even. "Faro Holdings does not own this equipment. I do. If you put the key in that ignition, you are committing grand theft auto. I've got cameras on the lot, and I will call the police right now." The kid stared at me, then looked at his phone, then back at the skid steers. He was making minimum wage to drive a truck in the middle of the night. He didn't want this kind of headache. "Look, buddy, I don't care about your company drama," he said, holding the keys out to me. "I was just contracted for a haul. I'm not getting arrested over a landscaping dispute." I took the keys from his hand. "Smart move. Tell whoever dispatched you that this address is off limits." He didn't argue. He turned around, jogged back to his sedan, and drove out of the lot, his tires spinning slightly on the wet gravel. I stood in the rain for a long time, watching his taillights disappear down the industrial park road. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the sheer proximity of the disaster. If I hadn't come to the warehouse tonight, if Nadia hadn't called me, I would have woken up tomorrow to an empty bank account and an empty equipment yard. Elias and Sable had orchestrated this down to the hour. They had set me up to be completely ruined by breakfast. I walked back into the office. Nadia was sitting at my desk, her laptop glowing in the dim room. She looked up at me, her eyes wide behind her glasses. "It was a transport driver," I said, tossing the heavy ring of machinery keys onto the desk. "Elias hired him to haul the skid steers to Tacoma. He's selling them out from under us." Nadia put her face in her hands. "He can't do this. He legally cannot do this without a majority vote. The operating agreement requires dual signatures for the liquidation of major capital assets. He doesn't care about the operating agreement, Nadia. He cares about cash in hand. By the time the lawyers figure out it's illegal, the money will be gone and the equipment will be chopped or shipped out of state." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 4:15 a.m. "We're staying here until the sun comes up. Nobody else comes into this yard unless they work for me." We spent the next 4 hours drinking stale coffee from the break room machine and combing through every single financial document Elias had touched in the last 2 years. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just the affair. The affair was almost secondary. The affair was just the lubricant that allowed them to plot my financial execution in my own house, right in front of me. They had been sitting at my dining room table, drinking my wine, petting my dog, all while figuring out how to funnel our Q2 profits into an LLC registered in Delaware under Sable's cousin's name. At 7:30 a.m., the first of the crew started arriving. I walked out to the yard. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy gray mist hanging over the asphalt. My foreman, Stellan, pulled in with his beat-up Ford Ranger. Stellan was a big, quiet guy, 10 years older than me, with a wife and a third kid on the way. He was the backbone of our field operation. He stepped out of his truck with a thermos of coffee, took one look at my face, and stopped. "Boss," Stellan said, his brow furrowing, "you look like you went 10 rounds with a concrete mixer. What's going on?" Gate was open when I pulled up. I walked over to him. 14 guys were going to be pulling into this lot over the next 20 minutes. 14 guys expecting their assignments, their truck keys, and their paychecks on Friday. "Stellan," I said, my voice cracking for the first time since this whole nightmare started. I cleared my throat. "Elias isn't coming in today. He's not coming in ever again." Stellan took a sip of his coffee, his eyes scanning the yard, noticing the skid steers parked awkwardly, the lights on in the main office. "Did you two finally have it out about the Mercer Island bid?" "No," I said. "He emptied the operating account last night. He tried to have the heavy equipment towed at 3 in the morning. He's been laundering company money through dummy vendors for 6 months." Stellan lowered his thermos slowly. The casual morning routine instantly vanished from his face. "What do you mean he emptied the account? Are you telling me we're broke?" "I'm telling you I'm handling it," I said, lying through my teeth because I had no idea how I was going to handle it. "But I need you to run the crews today. Nobody takes any equipment off this lot without you physically watching them load it. If anyone you don't recognize shows up asking about the trucks or the mowers, you call the cops." Stellan stared at me. He was a smart man. He knew that if the operating account was empty on a Wednesday, Friday's payroll was a ghost. "I've got a mortgage, man. I've got a baby due in 2 months." "I know," I said, feeling the immense, crushing weight of his word. "I swear to you, Stellan, I will sell my own truck before I let your check bounce. Just give me today to fix this." He held my gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, tight nod. "I'll keep the guys in line. You go do what you gotta do." I went back inside. Nadia had her coat on, clutching her laptop bag. It was 8:15 a.m. "Let's go," I said. "We're going to the bank." We drove downtown in separate cars. I parked my truck in a garage and met Nadia in front of the massive glass doors of our community bank. We were there 10 minutes before they opened. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the city wake up, feeling entirely disconnected from the people walking past me with their briefcases and umbrellas. Yesterday, I was one of them, a business owner, a husband. Today, I was a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, a security guard unlocked the doors. We walked straight past the tellers to the glass-walled offices in the back. The branch manager, a guy named Jasper, who I had played golf with a dozen times, was pouring a cup of water from a cooler. When he saw me, his smile faded. He looked quickly at his computer monitor, then back at me. "We need to freeze the commercial accounts," I said, stepping into his office and shutting the door behind Nadia. "All of them. Operating, payroll, the lines of credit, right now." Jasper didn't reach for his keyboard. He set his water cup down on on his desk and let out a long breath. I can't do that. What do you mean you can't do that? I'm the majority owner. My partner committed fraud. He wired $85,000 to an unregistered LLC yesterday afternoon. I know about the wire, Jasper said quietly, looking at me with an expression that looked far too much like pity. But I can't freeze the accounts because they're already frozen. Nadia stepped forward. Frozen by who? The fraud department? No, Jasper said. He opened a manila folder on his desk. Frozen by Elias. He came into the branch at 4:45 p.m. Yesterday, he presented a sworn affidavit stating that he suspected you of embezzling company funds to fuel a gambling addiction. He invoked the emergency contingency clause in your banking agreement to lock the account pending a legal review. I stared at him. The walls of the office felt like they were shrinking. A gambling addiction? I repeated, the absurdity of it ringing in my ears. I hadn't bought a lottery ticket in 10 years. It doesn't matter if it's true, Nadia said, her voice trembling slightly. She understood the banking laws better than I did. It's a holding maneuver. The bank is required to freeze the assets if one managing partner formally accuses the other of financial crime. It's standard liability protection for the branch. He locked the doors behind him, I whispered, the sheer evil genius of the plan finally clicking into place. Elias hadn't just stolen the money. He had used the bank's own security protocols to ensure I couldn't access whatever was left, and more importantly, to ensure I couldn't use the company's line of credit to survive the theft. He had cut my air supply. How long does the freeze last? I asked Jasper. Until you both come in here together and sign a release, or until a judge issues a court order, Jasper said, refusing to meet my eyes. I'm sorry, man. My hands are tied by corporate compliance. The system locked the accounts at 5 p.m. Yesterday, at 5 p.m. Yesterday, I was standing in my kitchen, sorting through mail, 3 hours before the text message. 3 hours before Elias showed up on my patio with a 6-pack of IPA. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an email notification. Not from Elias. Not from Sable. It was from a prominent downtown family law firm. The subject line read, Notice of Representation Sable Farrow / Petition for Dissolution of Marriage and Ex Parte Restraining Order. I opened the email. The legal jargon was dense, but the core of it was razor sharp. Sable had filed for divorce at 8 a.m. this morning when the courthouse opened. Attached to the filing was a request for an immediate temporary restraining order, barring me from our primary residence, citing erratic, aggressive, and threatening behavior. I scrolled down to the exhibits attached to the petition. Exhibit A was a screenshot. It was a still frame from the video I had recorded on the patio last night. The video I had uploaded to the cloud to use as proof of their infidelity. They had somehow accessed my cloud account, probably because I had lazily used the same password for my home network, and they were weaponizing my own recording. The screenshot was perfectly timed to show me standing over Elias, looking furious, holding the heavy metal Yeti tumbler like it was a weapon. They weren't just taking the money and the business. They were locking me out of my own home and painting me as the aggressor. I looked up from the phone. Jasper was watching me, his hands folded on his desk. Nadia looked completely overwhelmed, her laptop bag clutched against her chest. Okay, I said, the shock wearing off, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They had the money, they had the house, they had the legal high ground, but I had the physical warehouse, I had the trucks, and I had 14 guys who were loyal to me, not to Elias. Nadia, I said, turning to my accountant, call Stellan. Tell him to pull every truck back to the yard by noon. We're locking the gates. If they want this company, they're going to have to come rip it out of my hands. Nadia nodded, her hands shaking as she unlocked her phone screen. She didn't say a single word to Jasper, just turned on her heel and marched out of the glass office. I followed her, not looking back at the bank manager who had just casually handed my livelihood over to a thief based on a fabricated piece of paper. We stepped out into the cold morning air, the city noise hitting me like a wall. Horns blaring, bus brakes squealing, people walking by with their coffees, totally oblivious. I'll call Stellan right now, Nadia said, her voice tight, but losing that terrified tremble it had inside. Anger was starting to replace the shock. You get to the yard. I'm going to my office to pull every tax document you and Elias ever signed. Then I'm calling a lawyer I know. His name is Emerson Locke. He handles commercial litigation and high-conflict divorces, and he's vicious. You're going to need vicious. Just get the trucks back first, I said. I got to the parking garage, paid the ticket, and drove the speed limit back to the industrial park. I had to grip the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white just to keep my hands from shaking. It wasn't fear anymore. It was a deep, atomic rage. They had used my trust. They had weaponized the banking system. Now they were weaponizing the family court system. When I pulled up to the gate at 10:45 a.m., I could hear our yard before I even saw it. The deep, throaty rumble of diesel engines echoed off the corrugated metal buildings of the business park. Stellan had done exactly what I asked. All 6 of our green and white F-350s were parked in a defensive line blocking the main loading bays. The 2 heavy trailers we used for the skid steers were backed up against the chain link fence, effectively barricading the rear access point. The crew was standing around in a loose circle near the covered pallets of topsoil. 14 guys in muddy boots, Carhartt jackets, and high-vis vests. They were smoking cigarettes, drinking from thermoses, looking profoundly uneasy. When my truck rolled through the gate, the conversation stopped. 14 pairs of eyes locked onto me. I parked next to Stellan's Ranger, put it in park, and took a deep breath. I couldn't look like a guy who had just lost everything. I had to look like a guy who was going to war. Barnaby whined in the passenger seat. Stay here, buddy, I muttered, cracking the window for him before stepping out into the damp air. I walked over to the crew. Nobody said a word. Stellan tossed his cigarette butt into a puddle and crushed it beneath his boot. Gather round, I said, pitching my voice to carry over the idling trucks. They shuffled closer. Some of these guys had been with me for 5 years. I knew their kid's name. I had gone to their weddings. I had fronted them cash when their transmissions blew or their rent went up. I'm not going to lie to you, I started, looking them in the eye, moving from face to face. I'm not going to insult your intelligence with some corporate bullshit about restructuring. As of 5 o'clock yesterday, Elias is no longer a part of this company. He's gone. A murmur rippled through the group. A young kid named Arlo, who we'd just hired in the spring, frowned. What do you mean gone? I just saw him on Monday. I mean, he cleared out the main office last night, took the physical titles to the heavy machinery, and emptied our operating accounts into a private LLC, I said. The words tasted like ash, but saying them out loud stripped away the last of the illusion. He also locked the community bank account, meaning, as of this exact second, I cannot guarantee Friday's payroll. Dead silence. The kind of silence that sucks the air right out of your lungs. things. These were working men. You don't mess with a working man's paycheck. I have my accountant pulling every string she can, I continued, keeping my voice steady. I am going to fight him in court, and I am going to get that money back. But the legal system is slow, and rent is due on the 1st. If any of you need to walk off this lot right now to go find reliable work, I will write you a personal recommendation by hand, right here on the hood of my truck, and I will not hold it against you. You have to take care of your family. I paused, letting the reality set in. But if you stay, I said, lowering my voice just a fraction, if you stay and help me lock down this yard so he can't steal the equipment we need to finish the season, I swear to God I will make you whole. I will sell my own house. I will sell my personal truck. I will cash out my 401k with the penalty. But I need to know who is with me and who is walking. Nobody moved. The idling diesels rumbled in the background. Then Stellan reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick, heavy-duty padlock, and walked past me toward the rolling front gate. He slammed the gate shut on its track, wrapped a thick length of hardened steel chain around the bars, and clicked the padlock shut. He turned around and looked at the crew. Anybody else want to lock down the back fence, or are we just going to stand here freezing our asses off? Two of the older guys, Stellan's usual crew leaders, grunted in agreement and jogged toward the back of the yard to secure the secondary perimeter. Arlo swallowed hard, zipped up his jacket, and went to check the ties on the flatbed. Nobody walked off the lot. My chest tightened so hard it physically ached. They were staying. Boss, Stellan called out, walking back toward me. He pointed toward the road on the other side of the chain link fence. We got company. I turned. A beige Honda Civic had just pulled up to the curb outside our freshly padlocked gate. A guy in a cheap windbreaker and khakis stepped out, holding a thick manila envelope against his chest to keep it out of the drizzle. He walked up to the fence, looking at Stellan, then at me. I'm looking for the owner. Are you him? The guy asked, raising his voice over the engine. Depends on who's asking, I said, walking up the chain link. Process server for King County, he said, looking completely bored. He held the envelope up to the fence, trying to find a gap large enough to push it through. Got a court order here. Temporary restraining order and notice of a dissolution petition. You need to take it so I can log the service. I stared at the envelope. It was real. Sable had actually done it. She had filed the paperwork, slapped a domestic violence label on it with a cherry-picked screenshot, and pushed it through the system before I had even finished my morning coffee. I reached through the fence and took the heavy envelope. Consider yourself served, the guy muttered, turning back to his Honda. He drove off without another word. I ripped the envelope open right there in the rain. Stellan came up beside me, keeping a respectful distance, but clearly watching my fate. The paperwork was dense, full of legal stamps and court docket numbers, but the summary on the first page was crystal clear. Respondent is hereby ordered to maintain a distance of no less than 500 feet from petitioner. Respondent is hereby ordered to vacate the primary marital residence located at. Respondent is temporarily barred from selling, liquidating, or transferring any jointly held marital assets. They locked me out of my house, I said quietly. What? Stellan asked. My wife. She filed a restraining order. I can't go within 500 feet of my own house. I looked up at Stellan. I don't have any clothes. I don't have my dog's food. I don't have my passport. Stellan's jaw muscles flexed. He looked at the paperwork, then out at the street. You want me to go get your stuff? The order says you can't go near her. It doesn't say anything about a very large, very unbothered foreman showing up with a garbage bag to collect your dog's kibble and your underwear. I actually laughed. It was a sharp, humorless sound, but it broke the tension in my chest. Hold off on that. I don't want them calling the cops on you and getting you dragged into this mess. Let me talk to the lawyer first. Suit yourself, Stellan said. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and frowned. He swiped to open a message, read it twice, and then slowly looked up at me. You said Elias cleared out the accounts last night, right? Stellan asked. Yeah, why? Stellan turned his phone around so I could see the screen. It was a group text message. There were 14 numbers on the recipient list. Every single guy standing in my yard right now had just received it. The text was from a number I didn't recognize, but the sign-off was clear. Hey guys, it's Elias. You've probably figured out by now that the company is going under. I tried to save it, but my partner has been mismanaging the books for months, and the bank just froze everything. I've secured funding for a new venture, Faro Holdings. I have trucks waiting at a rented lot in Tacoma. If you leave the yard right now and come down here, I am offering a $1,000 cash signing bonus to every man who walks, plus a 20% bump on your hourly rate starting today. Don't go down with a sinking ship. Text me for the address. My blood turned into ice water. He wasn't just taking the money and the machines. He was coming for my crew. He knew that without the manpower, I couldn't fulfill the commercial contract. If I defaulted on the contract, the city would pull my bonding, the clients would sue me for breach, and the company would be forced into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Elias was trying to systematically dismantle the infrastructure of my life, so there would be absolutely nothing left for me to salvage. Arlo, Stellan barked suddenly, making me jump. Arlo, the young kid, had his phone out by the flatbed. He looked up, startled. You reading that text? Stellan asked, his voice booming across the yard. Arlo looked guilty, slipping the phone back into his pocket. Several other guys were looking at their screens too. Read it well, Stellan yelled out to the group. $1,000 cash today. Sounds real nice, but let me ask you something. A guy who sneaks into his own warehouse in the middle of the night to steal the titles to the truck. A guy who freezes the payroll account so you can't feed your kids on Friday. You think that guy is actually going to hand you $1,000 cash? Or do you think he's going to use you to load his stolen equipment and then screw you over just like he's screwing over the guy who built this place? Nobody said a word. Arlo looked down at his boots. If you want to chase a liar's money, the gate is right there, Stellan said, pointing to the padlock he had just secured. I'll open it for you, but if you walk out, don't ever ask me for a job again. The silence held for 10 long seconds. Then Arlo pulled his phone back out, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up. Block the number, he said quietly. A few other guys nodded and put their phones away. I looked at Stellan. I owed this man more than I could ever repay. A dark gray Audi sedan pulled up to the curb outside the fence. Nadia got out of the passenger side. A man got out of the driver's side. He was tall, late 50, wearing a sharp charcoal overcoat and carrying a battered leather briefcase. He walked up to the chained gate and looked through the links at me, completely unfazed by the line of heavy-duty trucks and the angry-looking landscapers. You the guy with the empty bank account and the cheating wife? He asked. His voice was gravelly, like he smoked cigars for breakfast. That's me, I said, walking over to unlock the padlock. I'm Emerson Locke, he said, stepping through the gate as I swung it open. He didn't offer his hand to shake. He just looked around the yard, taking in the defensive parking job and the crew. Nice perimeter. Shows you're not an idiot. Can we go somewhere that doesn't smell like diesel exhaust? I led him and Nadia into the main office. It was still a mess from last night. Files scattered on the floor. Elias's desk stripped of its hard drive. The air freezing cold. Emerson set his briefcase on my desk, popped the latches, and pulled out a legal pad. Nadia gave me the short version on the drive over. Tell me the rest. Do not spare my feelings. Do not try to make yourself look like a saint. Tell me exactly how bad this is. I sat in my chair and told him everything. The text message on the iPad. The patio confrontation. The video I recorded. The $85,000 wire transfer. The midnight transport driver trying to steal the skid steers. The frozen bank accounts. The mass text to my employees offering them a bounty to desert me. And finally, I tossed the thick manila envelope onto the desk. And she filed an ex-parte restraining order this morning. I finished. Using a screenshot from the video I took to claim I was threatening them with a metal cup. Emerson didn't react. He just kept writing notes on his legal pad with a gold fountain pen. When I stopped talking, he capped the pen and looked up at me. Okay, Emerson said. Here is the reality of your situation. You are currently fighting a two-front war. Family court and civil litigation. Both systems are incredibly slow, incredibly expensive, and highly susceptible to the exact kind of bad faith manipulation your wife and your partner are executing. So they just get away with it? I asked, feeling that cold rage flaring up again. I didn't say that, Emerson corrected sharply. I said it's slow. Elias filed a sworn affidavit with the bank claiming you have a gambling addiction to trigger an emergency freeze. That is perjury, and it is bank fraud. But proving that takes subpoenas. We have to file an emergency injunction to unfreeze the accounts, which requires a hearing. A judge has to look at the books. That takes a minimum of 2 weeks. I don't have 2 weeks, I said. I have a payroll due in 48 hours. I know, Emerson said, leaning forward, which is why we aren't going to play defense. We are going to bleed him. Nadia looked up from her laptop. How? He took the liquid cash. He took the operating cash, yes, Emerson said, turning to Nadia. But he didn't take the revenue stream. He can't. He's trying to start a new LLC, Faro Holding, right? And he's trying to poach the crew to fulfill the existing contract. But tell me about your big municipal contract, the city park renovation. When does that start? Next Monday, I said. It was a massive job. A $150,000 contract to overhaul the hardscaping at a 50-acre regional park. It was the job that was supposed to float us through the entire winter. And who signed the performance bond for that city contract? Emerson asked, a predatory little smile touching the corners of his mouth. I blinked. I looked at Nadia. You did. Nadia breathed, her eyes widening behind her glasses. When we renewed the surety bonds in January, Elias's personal credit score was in the toilet because of his condo mortgage and his credit card debt. The bonding agency wouldn't underwrite the company if he was on the application. You signed as the sole personal guarantor. Exactly, Emerson said, tapping his pen on the desk. The city of Seattle does not give a damn about Elias's new LLC. The contract was awarded to this company, backed by your personal surety bond. If Elias tries to show up at that park on Monday with a rented truck and a stolen crew under the name Faro Holdings, the city inspector will bounce him off the site in 5 minutes for being an unlicensed, unbonded, uninsured rogue contractor. I felt a sudden, sharp jolt of adrenaline. It was the first piece of good news I'd had in 12 hours. He needs my name to do the work. He needs your name to get paid, Emerson corrected. Which means right now, Elias is holding 85 grand in stolen cash, but he has absolutely zero incoming revenue to sustain his new fake company. He's burning cash to rent lots, rent trucks, and try to bribe your crew. He's on a ticking clock. What about the restraining order? I asked, pointing to the manila envelope. I literally don't have a place to sleep tonight. The Tro is a classic tactical nuke, Emerson said dismissively. She filed it to force you out of the house and establish early dominance in the divorce proceeding. The hearing to make it permanent is scheduled for 14 days from now. We will absolutely obliterate her at that hearing. But until then, yes, you must obey the letter of the order. If you go within 500 feet of that house, she will call the cops. You will be arrested for violating a protective order, and I will have a hell of a time explaining that away to a judge. He stood up, buttoning his charcoal coat. Nadia, I need you to draft a formal notice of dispute regarding the unauthorized wire transfer and send it to the Delaware Secretary of State where Faro Holdings is registered. Flag the LLC for fraudulent capitalization. He looked at me. And you need to secure capital for Friday's payroll. Call a private lender. Call a wealthy uncle. Pawn a watch. I don't care. Do not let your men down. If you lose the crew, you lose the ability to fulfill the city contract. And then Elias wins by default. I am going to file the emergency injunctions to freeze his new LLC's bank accounts. I'll call you tonight. Emerson walked out of the office, stepping back into the damp air. Nadia immediately opened her laptop and started typing furiously. I sat there, looking at the empty space where Elias's computer used to be. I needed $14,000 by Friday morning, cover the payroll, and keep my men. My phone buzzed on the desk. I picked it up. It was a local number, but not one I had saved in my contacts. I hit answer. Yeah, is this the owner of the landscaping company? A woman's voice asked. She sounded older, her voice thin and raspy. Speaking. Who is this? My name is Hester Trask. I live on the corner of Elm and 42nd in West Seattle. I'm calling because one of your company trucks is parked in my driveway and it's blocking my husband's wheelchair ramp. I sat up straight. A green and white F-350? No, Hester said. A silver Ford Expedition. It has your company logo on the door. My blood ran cold again. The silver Expedition wasn't a work truck. It was the luxury company vehicle we had bought for client meetings and bidding estimate. It was the vehicle Elias drove. Ma'am, how long has that vehicle been parked there? I asked, grabbing a pen and writing down the intersection on a stray piece of paper. Since about 6 o'clock this morning, she said, sounding annoyed. A man parked it, got out with a heavy black duffel bag, and got into a dark SUV that was waiting at the curb. A woman was driving. They sped off, and the truck has been sitting here ever since. Sable drives a dark blue SUV. They had dumped the company car. But why West Seattle? Elias lived in a condo in West Seattle, but he wouldn't park it randomly in an old woman's driveway unless he was trying to hide it. Mrs. Trask, please do not call a tow truck, I said, standing up and grabbing my keys. I am leaving right now to come get it. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I hung up the phone. I didn't tell Nadia where I was going. I just walked out into the yard, whistled for Barnaby, and told Stellan to keep the gates locked until I got back. I needed to see what Elias had left in that truck. The drive across the West Seattle Bridge took 20 minutes. The rain had had started up again, a steady, miserable drizzle that slicked the roads and matched the gray concrete of the city. I kept my eyes on the taillights ahead of me, my mind racing through the logistics of the next 48 hours. I needed 14 grand for payroll. I needed to freeze Faro Holding. I needed to not get arrested. I found the intersection of Elm and 42nd without the GP. It was a quiet, older neighborhood lined with massive cedar trees and mid-century bungalows. Hester Trask's house was a pale yellow single-story with a meticulously kept front lawn and an aluminum wheelchair ramp leading up to the porch. And parked right in the middle of her narrow concrete driveway, blocking the ramp entirely, was my company's silver Ford Expedition. I pulled my F-350 up to the curb, threw it in park, and grabbed my master ring of fleet key. I didn't even make it to the driveway before the front door of the yellow house opened. An older woman with sharp eyes and a thick wool cardigan stood behind the screen door. "You the owner?" she called out. "Yes, ma'am." "Hester?" I walked up, keeping my hands visible and my posture non-threatening. "I'm incredibly sorry about this. My former partner parked it here without my authorization. I'm moving it right now." Hester scrutinized me through the mesh. He was in a hurry. Left the driver's side door slightly ajar for about 10 minutes before the woman in the blue SUV laid on the horn. He slammed it, grabbed his bag, and they peeled out of here like they'd robbed a bank. She pointed a wrinkled finger at the Expedition. "I was halfway to calling the towing company when I saw your phone number on the side door." "I owe you," I said. "More than you know. Thank you for calling me instead." I walked over to the Expedition. It was a 2023 model, leather interior, top of the line. We bought it to drive high-end commercial clients around when bidding on corporate campuses. I hit the unlock button on my fob. The headlights flashed. I opened the door, and the smell hit me instantly. It was a mix of Sable's expensive vanilla-scented perfume and Elias's musky aftershave. The scent was so heavy, so intimately intertwined in the enclosed space, that my stomach physically rolled. I had to step back and take a breath of the cold, wet Seattle air, just to keep from throwing up in Hester Trask's driveway. They had been in this truck together. Frequently, I forced myself to get into the driver's seat. I started the engine, blasting the heat and rolling all 4 windows down to flush the air out. Then, I started tearing the interior apart. Hester was right. He was in a hurry. The center console was hanging open, CDs and charging cables spilling out. The glove box had been dumped onto the passenger floorboard. Maintenance manuals, registration papers, and expired insurance cards were scattered everywhere. He had been looking for something specific. I dug through the pile on the floor. Nothing but standard vehicle paperwork. I checked the door pocket, empty coffee cups and a few crumpled receipts for gas. Then I reached under the passenger seat. My fingers brushed against something thick and stiff. I pulled it out. It was a heavy, navy blue folder, the kind banks use for mortgage closings or commercial loans. I opened it on my lap. Inside was a stack of freshly printed documents. The header on the first page read, "Commercial Lease Agreement Faro Holdings LLC." I stared at the paper. It was a signed lease for a 2-acre fenced commercial lot in an industrial zone in Tacoma. The start date was listed as yesterday. The monthly rent was $6,000. Elias hadn't just been planning this. He had already executed the physical transition. He used my company's operating cash to put down the deposit on a lot big enough to store our skid steers, our trailers, and the trucks he planned to steal. And right there, on the second page, was the name of the leasing agent, the landlord's contact information, and the gate code to the new property. He didn't mean to leave it behind. When Sable laid on the horn to rush him, he must have grabbed his duffel bag, and the folder slid off the leather seat, falling into the gap underneath. I pulled out my phone and took high-resolution photos of every single page. Then I sent the photos directly to Emerson Locke's email with the subject line, "Faro Holdings Tacoma Asset Location." If Elias thought he was going to hide my heavy machinery down south, he was out of his mind. We had the address now. I was about to put the truck in gear and back out of the driveway when my phone started buzzing in my hand. The caller ID was a Seattle number I didn't have saved, but the prefix was familiar. It was the same prefix as my own cell phone, a family plan prefix. I hit accept and held the phone to my ear. I didn't say anything. "Are you done throwing your little tantrum?" Sable's voice was sharp, cold, and completely devoid of the warmth I had known for 7 years. She didn't sound guilty. She sounded annoyed. "Where are you, Sable?" I asked, my voice flat. "I'm at the house," she said smoothly. "Our house. The one you are legally prohibited from approaching. I hope you got the paperwork this morning. I told the server to make sure you were humiliated in front of your crew." She was baiting me. Emerson's warning flashed in my mind. She's trying to establish dominance. She's trying to get you to violate the order. "I got it," I said. "Is there a reason you're calling me from a burner number, or did you just want to gloat?" "I'm calling to offer you a way out," she said. I could hear the faint sound of the espresso machine running in the background. My espresso machine. In my kitchen. "Elias and I are willing to be reasonable. We know you're locked out of the account. We know you can't make payroll on Friday. You're going to lose the crew, and then you're going to lose the city contract. It's over. If it's over, why are you calling?" She paused, just for a second, but it was enough to tell me Emerson was right. They were sweating. The city contract bonding was the anchor around their necks. "Because we don't want to drag this through court for 3 years, Sable said, recovering her icy tone. "My lawyer has drafted a settlement. You sign over your equity in the business and dissolve the personal surety bond on the city contract. In exchange, I will drop the restraining order, let you have the house, and Elias will release the freeze on the remaining community bank fund. You get to walk away clean. You keep the house, you keep your dog, and we take the business." I gripped the steering wheel of the Expedition. They wanted to trade my own house, which they had stolen from me this morning, for $1 million commercial landscaping company. It was extortion, plain and simple. "You want me to dissolve the surety bond?" I said slowly, making sure I understood the exact shape of their desperation. "Because Elias can't get bonded on his own. Because his credit is garbage. You guys have 85 grand in cash and a brand new dirt lot in Tacoma. But you can't actually bid on any municipal work without me." The silence on the line was thick. The espresso machine stopped hissing. "You're being petty," she snapped, her mask slipping just a fraction. "You're going to bankrupt yourself just to spite us. You slept with my best friend in my basement for a month, Sable," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "You funneled my money through your cousin's fake logistics company. You filed a fraudulent restraining order to lock me out of my own bed. Petty left the building a long time ago. Now it's just math. You are going to lose everything," she hissed. "I will make sure of it. Send the settlement," I said calmly. "I'll use it as scrap paper when I rewrite the operating agreement. Tell Elias I found his lease folder in the Expedition, and tell him not to bother sending a tow truck for the skid steers tonight." I changed the the padlocks. I hung up before she could respond. I blocked the number immediately. My hands were shaking again, but this time, it was pure adrenaline. I had the upper hand. They had the cash, but I had the infrastructure, and I had the city contract. I looked at the Silver Expedition, paid off in full last year. The title was electronic, registered with the state under the company's master fleet ID. $14,000 for Friday's payroll. I didn't need to find a wealthy uncle or pawn a watch. I was sitting inside $40,000 of liquid asset. I pulled my phone back out and called Stellan. He answered on the first ring. Yards locked down, Stellan said over the background noise of the crew doing equipment maintenance. No sign of Alias. Good. Send Arlo to the corner of Elm and 42nd in West Seattle. Tell him to bring my truck back to the yard. I'm driving the Expedition. Where are you taking it? To a guy I know in Soto, I said, shifting the SUV into drive. I'm selling it. We're making payroll. I hung up the phone and merged onto I-5 South, heading straight for the industrial district in Soto. There was a guy down there named Thad who ran a used commercial fleet dealership. We had bought our first 2 dump trucks from him years ago. He was a straight shooter who dealt in high volume and fast turnaround, and most importantly, he always had liquid capital on hand. I pulled the Expedition onto his gravel lot just as the rain started coming down in sheets again. Thad was sitting in his prefab office, drinking coffee out of a styrofoam cup. I walked in, dropped the keys and the electronic title transfer paperwork on his desk, and told him I needed a cashier's check by close of business. He walked out, did a single lap around the truck, checked the odometer, and came back inside. He knew what it was worth. He also knew by the look on my face that I was desperate. He offered me $26,000. It was 10 grand less than Blue Book value, but it was 12 grand more than I needed to keep my men. Deal, I said. 2 hours later, I was standing at a teller window in a different branch of a different bank, depositing the cashier's check into a brand new single signer account. I wired $14,000 directly to our payroll processor and paid the expedited fee to ensure the direct deposits would clear by midnight. Friday morning at the yard felt entirely different than Thursday. The heavy, suffocating dread was gone. When the guys started pulling in at 7, checking their banking apps on their phones, the mood shifted from defensive to fiercely loyal. Arlo actually jogged over to my truck and shook my hand. Stellan didn't say anything sentimental. He just grabbed his clipboard, looked at the roster, and said, "We've got the prep work for the city park on Monday. Let's get the trailers loaded." I spent the weekend in a cheap motel out by the airport. It smelled like stale smoke and industrial carpet cleaner, but I slept better than I had in months. I had Barnaby curled up at the foot of the bed, and my phone buzzing every few hours with updates from Emerson and Nadia. The Delaware Secretary of State had frozen Faro Holdings registration pending a fraud investigation. The 85 grand Elias stole was sitting in a locked account he couldn't touch. But the real test was Monday morning. At 5:30 a.m., I pulled my truck up to the gates of the 50-acre regional park. The sky was still the color of bruised iron, the wet grass heavy with morning dew. Stellan and the crew were right behind me in a convoy of 4 loaded F-350. When we turned onto the main access road, my stomach tight. Parked blocking the service entrance were 3 rented white flatbed trucks. Standing next to them, holding a clipboard and looking incredibly smug, was Elias. He had 3 guys with him, scabs he must have hired off a day labor site over the weekend. I parked my truck, put Barnaby on his leash, and walked up to the gate. Stellan and my 14 guys piled out of their truck and fell in behind me. The sound of 15 pairs of heavy work boots crunching on the gravel was deafening in the quiet morning air. Elias's smug expression faltered a little as we approached, but he held his ground. "You're trespassing," Elias said, his voice carrying that familiar, arrogant edge. "Faro Holdings is taking over this site. I already sent the notice to the city. Go home before I call the cops and have you arrested for violating the restraining order. I know Sable is on the deed to this park's adjacent property." He was bluffing. The adjacent property was a public library. But before I could even tell him to shut up, a white Ford Explorer with the City of Seattle Parks Department seal on the door rolled up the access road. A guy in a hard hat and a high-vis jacket stepped out. He was the chief site inspector. I'd worked with him twice before. His name was Bowen. Bowen looked at the barricade of rented trucks, then at Elias, and finally at me. "What's the holdup?" Bowen asked, pulling a thick folder out of his truck. "We're supposed to break ground at 6. Inspector," Elias said, stepping forward smoothly, extending a hand. "Elias, we met during the bidding phase. My new firm, Faro Holdings, will be servicing the contract starting today due to internal restructuring at the old company." Bowen didn't take Elias's hand. He opened his folder, flipped past the first 2 pages, and pulled out a pen. "I don't care about your internal restructuring," Bowen said, his voice flat and bureaucratic. "I care about liability. I have a performance bond and an insurance certificate on file for this contract. The sole personal guarantor listed on the surety bond is standing right there." He pointed his pen at me. "I'm the managing partner," Elias argued, his face flushing red. "I have the cash reserves to back the bond. The paperwork is just delayed." "Then you don't work today," Bowen said simply. "City policy. No bond, no boots on the ground. And if this equipment belongs to you, it's currently parked illegally on a municipal right-of-way." Bowen looked at his watch. "You have 10 minutes to move these rented trucks, or I'm calling the city tow yard to impound them at your expense." Elias stared at the inspector. The reality of what was happening finally crashed down on him. He had stolen the cash, but he couldn't generate revenue. He was holding an empty bag, paying $6 grand a month for a dirt lot in Tacoma, paying daily rates for rented trucks, and paying lawyers to fight a war he had already lost. Without me, he was completely useless. Elias looked at me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening panic. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg, maybe to try and strike a deal right there on the gravel. But I didn't give him the chance. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I just looked right through him, turned to my foreman and nodded. "Stellan," I said, "get the chainsaws unpacked. We've got a schedule to keep." I walked past Elias, Barnaby trotting faithfully at my side, and stepped onto the damp grass of the job site. Behind me, I heard the sound of the rented trucks firing up, their engines whining as Elias and his scabs backed out of the driveway in defeat. A minute later, the deep, steady rumble of my own crew's equipment filled the air, drowning out the sound of Elias driving away for good. The air smelled like wet cedar and diesel exhaust. It smelled like a fresh start.